Trek to Yomi is a beautiful looking game. Developer Flying Wild Hog chose to go with the black and white aesthetic for this side-scrolling action game, with tons of film grain to give it that old Japanese cinema look. And honestly, the game does a phenomenal job of feeling like an old silent film from the early 1900s, and that's what kept me playing the game the whole way through. Although the game's pretty short to begin with, so that's no hard feat. The game takes place in feudal Japan as you take control of Hiroki, a samurai warrior in charge of defending his village. Now, the game has its fair share of problems, with the most evident being the combat. It's not bad necessarily, but a better word to describe the combat would be lacking or janky. You take on enemies with your sword on a 2D playing field, and at first it looks like you can move all around the screen, but no, left to right only. Enemies come at you from both sides of the screen, and you can switch directions with the press of a button. You can perform light and heavy attacks, as well as parry enemy attacks, which then transition into your counter attack. The parries feel super smooth when done properly. The thing is, there's a delay or unresponsiveness to the combat, but it's not all the time. And I've checked with some friends who've played the game to make sure I'm not losing it. I changed nothing about the way I parry enemy attacks, and the parry will only execute about 50% of the time. Very frustrating considering the game centers itself around this parry system, most notable during boss fights. After a while, I resorted to just button mashing light attacks to handle most enemies. Luckily, you unlock lengthier combos as the game goes on. These are pretty sweet because Hiroki moves like an authentic samurai. Well, at least like a samurai you've seen in movies or other video games. I was impressed by how much attention to detail they put into the character movement here, with enemies occasionally having some kind of odd hitch in their step as they approach you. Other than that, I like the design of the main character, clearly inspired from Ghost of Tsushima or Samurai X if you ask me. Sadly, there's no real variety to the enemies as far as the moves they can perform against you. Sure, enemies have different weapons like spears and guns, but the way to defeat them is always the same. Block or parry their move one time and go in for the kill. At one point in the game, you start to come across undead enemies, which I found refreshing, and even more so when you return and start to face off against human enemies again. But they all share the same moveset more or less, which makes the combat feel repetitive. In action games, I like to see enemies that require unique ways to be defeated based on the abilities you've unlocked, like in Metroid Dread, which I just started playing, or like in the God of War series. I don't know, it just adds to the feeling of your character's progression, like he's more and more equipped to handle whatever the game has to throw at you. The visuals are by far the strongest aspect of Trek to Yomi. From the second you press start new game to the ending credits, Trek to Yomi utilizes the black and white aesthetic brilliantly here, whether it be running through quaint villages or climbing burning buildings as they collapse at the last second. There are moments in the game that take notes directly from the films that it's trying to pay homage to, with camera angles that pan across the land as Hiroki navigates his way through them, as if airlifted directly from a movie. My favorite scenes are the backdrops that come into frame as the characters fight or talk in front of them. During my playthrough, I didn't notice any pre-rendered graphics either. Every object in the game looks fully rendered, providing an even more immersive world. What Trek to Yomi lacked in enemy variety, it makes up for with environments. You start off in a typical Japanese village, wandering indoors, outdoors, and on rooftops. Eventually, you make your way into God of War style tombs that are located outside of towns around the mountainside. There's a twist in the story that takes you into an otherworld of sorts, with demons and spiders embodying the environment. Also, I played on PC with epic settings and the game ran over 60 frames a second, no problem. I'm actually not a fan of indie games that rely too heavily on the artistic styling of a game and nothing else, but Trek to Yomi is one camera angle away from being a AAA title. If this game was over the shoulder, you could easily mistake it for a Ghost of Tsushima game. Honestly, if you get past the combat and take in all the sights that the game has to offer, you'll enjoy your time with Trek to Yomi. Another issue I'm hoping gets fixed in a sequel perhaps is the lackluster puzzle design. So literally, the one and only puzzle in this game is the symbol matching puzzle. You walk up to these areas that glow, and in order to proceed, you have to select which symbols are found in the environment and highlight them on the puzzle screen. Most of the time, only 2 symbols are shown and you have to uncover the 3rd symbol somewhere. But did they not realize you could just cycle through the 3rd option even if you don't even know what it is and wait for it to solve itself? The choice to add these puzzles as an obstacle between 2 areas was baffling to me. I didn't necessarily want some complex puzzles that take 40 minutes to complete, but some environmental puzzles with some switches and blocks could have gone a long way. Traversing areas in Trek To Yomi is pretty straightforward. There's no real exploring to speak of. Like I said before, movement is really just left to right. Here and there, you'll need to go into houses and onto rooftops, or go left at a fork in order to find the collectible. But overall, there's only ever one way to the next area. It's gonna be fight a few enemies, go to the next area. Fight a few enemies, go to the next area. Rinse and repeat. The sound design is yet another example of how polished the developer wanted this game to be. You won't get much in terms of high energy background music constantly playing at all times, but this isn't what the game sets out to do. Instead, there's the classic Japanese flute playing in the background as you battle enemies. And I prefer that. The more subdued, relaxed approach complements the slow nature of the game between fights. The sounds of swords clashing are at the forefront of the soundscape, and your main character's footsteps as he walks or runs along. I love when an indie game is made with such attention to detail. Trek To Yomi is a pretty short game. I beat the game in a matter of hours, but I didn't mind this. I wanted a game I could zone out to and complete without the extra padding found in modern AAA games that require you to complete dozens of side quests that aren't even interesting or important to the main plot. You could even set the game's difficulty to what is essentially easy mode, in which the game itself informs you is a way to blast through the combat and enjoy the story. The story sticks to the basics, and I think they intended for that. You play as Hiroki, a samurai and protector of the village. One day the village is attacked by a rival gang, and Hiroki sets out to defend the town along with his love interest, who together form a team of sorts as she stays behind and directs everyone to safety until the attack is over. Minor spoilers ahead. In a pretty obvious plot twist, Hiroki is killed in battle and transported to a mirrored version of his world filled with undead enemies. Hiroki's former allies see him as a traitor now and even try to kill him in this world. Hiroki must trek to Yomi in order to avenge his town and possibly find a way out of this underworld. While the story isn't anything blockbuster, it serves as good motivation to continue the journey as Hiroki, and that's all you need. The story is almost completely voice acted in Japanese, which helps retain the authentic Japanese vibe. And I'm no Japanese expert, but the voices sounded excellent. While playing Trek To Yomi, you can tell that they focus most of their attention to the absolutely stunning backdrops and environments. The combat is a bit janky, but still fun once you make that jank adjustment. There is an original experience to be had here. Take comfort in knowing that you'll still be playing an overall polished game despite a few flaws. That'll do it for my review of Trek To Yomi. Make sure to support the channel by subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.